I bought the property with someone else and I wasn't aware of that landfill at all. So,
at the moment, no. Don't know how it's managed at all.
Basically, the only information we've had has been from the local paper, and we haven't seen any information on the site for years, really.
These three people live, or used to live, near former landfill sites that are listed on the Environment Protection Authority of Victoria's Priority Sites Register. The EPA Priority Sites Register is basically a list of all the contaminated sites in Victoria that require ongoing management or cleaning up. The sites listed include former petrol stations, former industrial sites, former landfill sites, and more. According to the EPA, the sites that are on this list present a potential risk to human health or to the environment. But up until recently, these three people were unaware that the former landfill sites near their homes were on this list. If these sites pose a potential risk to human health or to the environment, why weren't they aware? Director of the EPA, Matt Vincent, says that while there's no requirement to install signage at these sites to indicate to residents that they are on the Priority Sites Register, in cases where there is no serious risk to human health, he says notifying residents in this way would only cause unnecessary concern. In fact, there are two main ways that a former landfill site can be a potential risk to people and the environment: leaching and landfill gas. Leachate is water that has passed through a landfill and become contaminated by the waste it has come into contact with. If a landfill is not properly lined, leachate can seep out of the landfill and be exposed on the ground at the surface. All landfills produce gas as the waste is compacted and covered over, allowing little air to reach it as it decomposes. It is the EPA's job to make sure the owners of landfill sites manage the level of landfill gas produced, so it does not reach a level that would harm people or the environment. Here, Matt Vincent illustrates how landfill gas and leachate are produced and how landfill infrastructure can extract them.
There are very strict requirements around landfills, and one of those is that they must be lined so that they cannot seep. Of course, the risk being that any water or chemicals, etc., from the landfill end up in the groundwater, so that's the purpose of the liner. And also when they're capped, they need to have a liner as well, and the idea of that is to stop water getting into the landfill. As that waste breaks down, it produces a large amount of gas, and they need to have the infrastructure in place to be able to extract that gas, and usually they burn that off, in some cases generating electricity from it, and that ensures that gas doesn't escape into the atmosphere and have a detrimental impact.
Shane Walker lives near Llewellyn Park in Wantirna South, a former landfill site that has been converted into parkland for public use. He walks his dog there every day. The site was used as a quarry in the 1970s and 80s, and then used as landfill for putrescible waste, or everyday household waste, by the Knox City Council until 1985. The EPA sent the Knox City Council what's known as a Pollution Abatement Notice, or PAN, in 2003, which is like a list of requirements that the owner of the site must meet every year to ensure the site is safe for people and the environment. With the help of an EPA-approved environmental auditor, the site owner must submit reports to the EPA regularly to show how their site is meeting the PAN requirements. According to the EPA website, the Knox City Council have failed to fully comply to the requirements of their PAN for Llewellyn Park 2 years in a row. For the 2009-2010 financial year, 80% of the total requirements were met. In the annual performance statement for that year, it says the Knox City Council failed to prevent contaminated stormwater from being discharged beyond the boundaries of the site, to prevent land and groundwater contamination, to prevent emissions of landfill gas from exceeding EPA specified levels, and to progressively rehabilitate landfill cells in accordance with EPA specified standards. For the 2010-2011 financial year, only 76% of the total requirements were met. In that annual performance statement, it says the Knox City Council failed to prevent nuisance dust from being discharged beyond the boundaries of the site, to ensure stormwater discharged from the site is not contaminated with waste, to prevent land or groundwater contamination, to ensure waters contaminated by leachate are not discharged beyond the boundaries of the site, to prevent emissions of landfill gas from exceeding EPA-specified levels, and to immediately notify the EPA of non-compliance with any condition of their licence. EPA Media Liaison Ruth Ward was not able to respond to questions about what this meant for the Knox City Council before deadline. However, it does say in the Knox City Council's site licence issued by the EPA, strict penalties apply for non-compliance with any part of your licence, including fines of up to 2,400 penalty units and or imprisonment for up to 2 years for company directors. Mr. Walker still notices leaching at the park and wonders if it's safe for he and his dog to walk there.
Yes, I've noticed it, especially on the lower ends, and it's always been a bit of a gooey looking mess from time to time. I am a bit concerned. The dog licks the puddles and drinks the water and wanders around in the bush, especially after we got that letter from council that was so ambivalent you couldn't really tell what they were talking about.
Shane is talking about this letter, which was sent to residents living around the park and details improvements that the park will soon receive. It does not say anywhere in the letter that Llewellyn Park is on the EPA Priority Sites Register. The Knox City Council declined to comment or to be interviewed. Murray Jeffs lives near the former landfill site at 14 Federation Street, Box Hill. The site was used as a quarry between 1884 and 1988, and then as landfill for a brickworks company between 1990 and 1999. The site took solid inert waste, which are materials like building rubble, plastic, glass and metals. The site owner, Filio Australia Limited, was issued a PAN in 2004.
I know many years ago it was determined that it be filled with solid clean fill, as I recall, and we watched for years as the trucks went in and emptied, and it was a massive hole, and it took 10 years or so to fill it, and you had a lot of truck movement in the area. You had quite a bit of dust, and from time to time when it was hot and windy, you had wet and muddy roads from time to time near the entrance, etc. But it was just something in the background. We never worried terribly much about it.
Although he has not noticed any problems with the site, he was not aware that it was ranked poorly in a site assessment report this year, which noted a leaching problem and that the owner had breached requirement 4 of their PAN, which was to ensure that leachate or stormwater contaminated with leachate was not discharged beyond the boundaries of the premises. The EPA did not provide access to annual performance statements for this site before deadline. In 2006, a section of the site was rezoned into a residential area. Matt Vincent says that a site must meet strict requirements before it, or a section of it, can be rezoned into a residential area.
It would need to go through an extensive process of being audited and determine any risk of harm. So an auditor would actually need to do a full investigation in terms of determining, is there any potential risk here to residents or residential development, and then ultimately the auditor would be required to sign off saying that there are no risks, and that process would be quite lengthy, quite costly in terms of satisfying those requirements.
In a written statement, EPA Media Liaison Ruth Ward said, "The company is continuing to monitor, maintain and manage the site, as required by the PAN." In response to questions about the leaching problem, she writes, EPA investigated and met with the owners, environmental consultant and council. A short-term fix was put in place to address the water, and a permanent solution is being installed. Again, the EPA did not respond to questions about what those solutions were before deadline. Filio Australia Limited declined to comment or to be interviewed. In 2008, Deborah Edwards and her partner at the time bought a new house in the Brooklyn Greens estate in Cranbourne. They had not yet moved into the house when in late 2008, some Brooklyn Greens residents were evacuated after it was reported by the Country Fire Authority that the gas emission levels from the nearby Stevensons Road landfill site were dangerously high. Ms. Edwards was not aware of the landfill site when she bought her house and thinks people should be notified when their house is situated near a priority register site. She has since moved out of the house, but her ex-partner remains there.
Well, I actually wasn't aware of that. That really should have been on the contract, the details of the property and the land beforehand, and I don't believe it was. The details of what was going on there wasn't evident, and it wasn't told to everybody. There was information that should have been there that wasn't. It was just lucky that we weren't actually living in the house at that time, because people were evacuated, and those that weren't, I mean, if I was one that wasn't, I'd be thinking, should I be here? You know, you'd be scared because you don't know. So in that regard, I guess it wasn't so bad for us. Personally, for me, it was just mainly that unpleasant smell while I was living there that affected me. You felt it was unhealthy. You thought, what am I breathing, you know? Couldn't have a window open in the house and things like that. For the stress and everything, it did cause a lot of people, some more than others, a lot more than it did for me, for some people. Yeah, no, it was good that it was acknowledged and people were reimbursed for what had gone on.
Residents who took out a class action against the EPA and the Casey City Council shared in $17.25 million after a settlement was reached earlier this year. In exchange for the settlement, residents had to agree to forever release the Casey City Council and the EPA for any liability for the claims made in the proceeding. The Casey City Council declined to comment or to be interviewed. Greens MLC, Colleen Hartland, has campaigned extensively over her career to minimise the impact of toxic sites on people and the environment. She says that councils and the EPA should learn from the Brooklyn Greens incident and that there should be an apology made to the residents.
I think you go back and you read the Ombudsman's report and it was a litany of errors. You would hope that they've learnt something from that. I know other councils have taken a lot of notice of that particular episode. I think it's not just about compensation. There actually needs to be an apology to those residents from the EPA and from the council.
Here, Matt Vincent describes how landfill standards have changed since the Brooklyn Greens incident, where the landfill was built at a time when lining requirements were not as stringent.
Look, landfill standards do change over time, and historically a landfill may not necessarily have required, say, a liner, a thick plastic liner to stop things getting in and out. And so over time things have changed. The standards of today are much more rigorous, and so when either lining a landfill or putting a cap over it, there are very strict requirements now that are actually not only proven to protect the environment, but are commonly used across the world. I think some of the learnings from the Cranbourne example are just around really stringent requirements around managing these sites, ensuring that there isn't encroachment on buffers. But the key thing is that we understand how landfills work. We know the risks associated with them, and it's about being very disciplined and being very clear to business and industry about what's expected in terms of managing those landfills.
Colleen Hartland says that it should be clear on people's land title documents if their house is situated near a priority register site, and that while she can see the beginnings of change within the EPA, she wants to see action.
I think it should actually be on our titles, so that when you buy a property, on your title it says, 500 metres here, 500 metres there, that is what surrounds your site. And it doesn't happen. I have a very long and not all that productive history with the EPA. I think the current CEO of the EPA, John Merrick, is someone who is actually trying to change the culture of the EPA. So I have to give credit where it's due, but I want to see actions rather than just words.
Matt Vincent says the EPA is working to be more transparent with the information they give to the public about the sites that are on the priority sites register.
We've developed a transformation plan that aims to implement a whole series of recommendations made through our compliance and enforcement review. But a big part of it is really about clarity of purpose, who we are, what we're going to focus on, and understanding the key things that we'll do as the regulator, but also completely modifying our systems and processes to ensure that we can be the best we can.